Welcome, everyone. We're just letting you know that you are online. Hopefully you can hear my voice. And everybody is on mute. If you would like to send us any questions or comments, you can use the chat window on the side. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself for a moment, and we will get started at 1:30. Just wanted to let you know that you are online. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this really special opportunity to speak live with an astronaut, Gregory Johnson. We're really excited that you can join us. Before Mr. Johnson is able to join our call, I'd like to introduce everyone to Joby Cook, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about the NASA North Carolina Space Grant Organization and what that means and what they do, and then give you some background information about Mr. Johnson as well. So Joby, if you're on the line, let's turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here today. I am like giddy with excitement because we've got a really neat astronaut that's coming to join just our small little group today to talking about living and working in space. But first, I wanted to give you an overview of the North Carolina Space Grant and who we are, and something for you to follow on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter to keep up with what we're doing here in North Carolina. So we are headquartered at NC State University, and pretty much we are a higher education program where we give fellowships and scholarships to students to study aerospace related stuff. It could be engineering, it could be science, it could be earth science. Anything that NASA does research in, we will support your activities in those efforts. And in addition to those fellowships and scholarships, we partner with organizations such as the First League in North Carolina, museums, and other educational entities to provide opportunities like this to students and teachers across our wonderful state. And I want you to keep us in mind and in your back pocket, because as you move along in your educational pursuits through middle school and high school and you're making college plans, keep us in mind here at Space Grant, because there are opportunities to provide scholarships for you once you enter North Carolina colleges across the state, colleges or universities. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty today. I want to give you an overview of Gregory Johnson, who is a former astronaut. And I want to kind of let you know that if you're Googling Greg Johnson on the internet, there is a Greg H. Johnson and a Greg C. Johnson, both of which are astronauts. So make sure you know that we are talking to Greg H. Johnson. And he has a very decorated career, both in NASA and in the military. And I just want to go over that with you. You can see on this kind of slide here that he was born in England, but he's a really cool guy, and he likes to travel, bike, golf, music. He's just a really personable guy. So let's talk about his astronaut career. So he was selected as a NASA astronaut back in 1998 and piloted 2 space shuttle missions, STS-123 and STS-134, both aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour, where he spent nearly 32 days in orbit and contributed to the assembly of the International Space Station. In October of 2011, he began a rotational assignment as the Associate Director of External Programs at NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. And in that role, he managed public affairs, outreach, and educational programs at the center. But before joining NASA, he was a decorated officer and pilot with the United States Air Force. Colonel Johnson flew 34 combat missions in support of Operation Desert Storm and 27 missions during Operation Southern Watch. In 1994, he was assigned to the 445th Flight Squadron at Edwards Air Force Base, where he flew and tested the F-15 and the NF-15 and other aircraft. So during nearly his 25 years in the Air Force, Colonel Johnson logged over 5,000 flight hours in more than 50 different aircraft. And that's pretty amazing. And based on some research that I had done about Mr. Johnson, he actually spent a little bit of time at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro, North Carolina. So we can claim that he has a little bit of time here in North Carolina working throughout his career. So as far as his education, he received a Bachelor's of Science in Aeronautical Engineering from the United States Air Force Academy, and his Master's of Science in Flight Structures Engineering from Columbia University, and an MBA from the University of Texas in Austin. So a very decorated career. So I know you are currently looking at a slide that talks about his spaceflight experience. So while we're waiting for him to join us on the call, let's just take a few moments to kind of look at some of the accomplishments that he's had in both his STS-123 mission and his STS-134 mission. And since looks like we've got about 10 minutes before he talks, if you have any questions about the North Carolina Space Grant or anything like that, I'm happy to take questions now if you'd like to, Marie.
Sure. So if anyone has a question, on your screen, you should have a GoToWebinar control panel, and there is a chat window there. You can type in your message in the chat window and send it either just to the entire audience or just to me, and we can then read that question out loud, and then Joby can go ahead and answer it for you. So if you have any questions, do please put them in the chat window. And I'm noticing that some people also have a questions window, so I can look at that there as well. So yes, this is the right chat tray. And a question we have is, are there scholarships for college students or high school students as well?
Very good question. So NASA has an internship program for high school students. And to get more information about that, you can look up NASA internships on our North Carolina Space Grant website, which is very easy at ncspacegrant.org. With regards to other scholarships, our scholarships right now are only for undergraduate and graduate level students. But we do support high school students that have been selected to participate in NASA internships. So there are opportunities out there.
And I think you already answered the question of, does the Space Grant Program have an undergraduate program? So
yes, we do. Yes, okay. We have a very strong undergraduate program. Not only do we provide scholarships to students directly, but we also provide support for undergraduate teams of students that are doing rocketry, robotics, unmanned aerial systems work. And a lot of these undergraduate teams are going on and competing in NASA-related competitions. One of our teams from Duke University has an electric vehicle team, and they won the Shell Eco Marathon this past year. So if you look at our website, we have a lot of stories on there, and our Facebook page has a lot more stuff about what our students are doing.
Okay, and I'm looking through some questions that are, so this is a great question for you, Joby. Who founded the NC Space Grant?
Very good question. Congress actually started Space Grant. So back in 1988, Congress was realizing that the NASA workforce was getting a little older and they needed a younger workforce to replace those that would be soon retiring. So they created the National Space Grant College and Fellowship Program back in 1988, and the North Carolina Space Grant started in 1991. Currently, there are 52 Space Grant consortia. There's one in every state, plus DC and Puerto Rico. So if your college or educational career takes you to another state to attend college, there is a space grant there for you where you can take advantage of scholarship opportunities there as well.
And does the space grant directly work with NASA?
Yes, we do. So we are a NASA program funded by the Office of Education, and we have partnerships with all the NASA centers, and we send students to, in North Carolina, we send students to all of the NASA centers to do internships, and we have faculty at our universities that are doing research at those various NASA centers as well. So we have a very close relationship to NASA, yes.
And then we've got several questions coming in for Mr. Johnson when he gets on the line. And one of the questions that you might be able to answer is, how long was he an astronaut?
How long was he an astronaut? So let me look and see. So he was selected for an astronaut back in 1998, and he was engaged with NASA through about 2012. He wasn't an astronaut during that whole time, just during those missions, but oftentimes when astronauts complete their space work, they're assigned to work at NASA centers or at NASA headquarters to continue space exploration efforts after they've completed their space travel assignments.
Okay, we've got a whole bunch of questions asking about that are going to be very specific to him. The one question is he currently in space? And I believe I know that answer. No, he is currently on Earth. Is the space grant program currently training any astronauts that have a possibility to go to Mars? Oh, and look, we have Mr. Gregory Johnson. He should be on your screen with his camera. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Johnson. My name's Marie, and I am a huge space fan and total geek when it comes to space travel. So I'm really, really excited to introduce you to the first LEGO League students across the state of North Carolina, here to learn from you more about what it's like to be in space and space travel. We're going to turn it over to you.
All right. So I'm really happy to join you all. How in North Carolina, where are you all from? What cities or what groups?
They are literally scattered across the entire state, from the mountains to the coast and everything in between. And they're all on mute,
awesome,
having to chat into us.
Yeah, so I lived in North Carolina. I was assigned my first operational fighter flight in North Carolina at Goldsboro, just to the southeast of Raleigh-Durham. My wife and I, that was the first time we were away from the family. And of course, we moved there, and then immediately the Persian Gulf War kicked off in 1991. So I left her for 6 months. So, but we loved North Carolina, and at the time said, "Wow, man, maybe that's where we'll go retire." So you have a beautiful state, and we've been all over it. She went to school at ECU, got her teacher's certificate, and honestly, one of the big moments in my life that was, there are so many different events that influence us as we pursue opportunities. Happened to me in Raleigh-Durham with a guy named Charlie Bolden, who just recently was the NASA administrator for about 8 years. But he was an astronaut pilot, and would it have not been for a meeting that I had with him at Raleigh-Durham, I probably wouldn't have been an astronaut. So different people touch us during our lives, and it's important to listen for those opportunities to happen, because they can really change your life. And that my life was changed in North Carolina. So North Carolina has a special place in my heart, and I'm really excited to be talking to you today. All right, so I see this is the photograph that we're looking at below was my second crew, STS-134. You might recognize Mark Kelly. He's the gentleman in the center he's one of the identical twins. His brother was the one who went to space for almost a year, a few years ago. So Joby, are you kind of the moderator, or how do you want to?
I am. Hello, Greg. Very nice to have you today. And I did not know until preparing for this that you had spent some time in Goldsboro. I live 20 minutes from Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. So you do have a North Carolina connection. So that makes this talk even more special today. So thank you so much for taking the time out today to talk with us. So I gave you a little bit of background with regards to the first LEGO League Challenge this year, which is Liftoff. And the kids are challenged to think about some real world problems this year with relation to space. And we were getting several questions from across our state from students who wanted to know about living and working in space. So we had a chance to talk with Marie Hopper, who is the director of the first league in North Carolina. And we thought it would be best to assemble a talk today where the students could submit questions, and they can all have an opportunity to learn about what it's like to live and work in space. So I've kind of categorized the questions into 3 buckets, and the first bucket here is living and working in space. So Marie has very nicely posted those questions here on the screen in order, and if you would like to just work through these, you have the floor for living and working in space, and you can definitely share that information with us.
Okay, and so I'd like to compliment the North Carolina students for your excellent questions. I reviewed these questions a couple weeks ago when you all sent them to me, And of course, I'm looking at them right now. So congratulations. And I'm really excited that you're in an extracurricular program. You know, you're curious, you're learning, and that is such an important part of your preparation for when you move on into your career and do all the wonderful things that adults get to do through their lifetimes. So I'll start with, does the Earth look flat from space? No. See the photograph to your right? That's the Earth has a curvature to it that we see from space. We're about 250 miles up, so the Earth is 8,000 miles across. So we're not that far from the Earth's surface, but you definitely can see the curvature. If you look straight down, it looks sort of flat. How long do you usually stay on the ISS, and does the food get brought up to you? How often? So there's a range for the amount of time that is spent on the ISS. Some of the tourists that the Russians flew were only a couple days. My flights, I was up there for about 2 weeks attached to the space station, and then a couple days coming or going. The food is pretty much 100%, well, 99.9% brought up to us, and still is. Food is dehydrated food like you might take on a camp out, and then you add hot or cold water. Sometimes it's food like the meals ready to eat that the military has, and we warm those up. The Russians have canned food. We generally have them in bags, and then there is some limited fresh food brought up. So we get very limited fruits and vegetables. We do have a veggie, project where we have grown lettuce in space, but we haven't, to my knowledge, gotten that to scale where we really could say that we're growing salad up in space. But that's something that we're going to need to do and learn how to do. How often is the space station resupplied? That varies, but it's every couple months or so. There's a cargo mission that'll fly to and from the space station. Do the plants have do you have plants that grow fruit or vegetables up there? So I haven't learned of any fruit being grown up there, but we have grown lettuce. How do you test and certify items for flight? So I'm going to take the U as the huge team here on the ground that prepares us for flight. As you likely suspect, there's very few astronauts compared to the thousands of people that do all the hard work. And there are several groups on the Earth that their entire job is to test and certify items for flight. If there are experiments that might have toxic items in them or something that could be a hazard to the crew members, then they are obviously tested, and the certification process is a lot longer. For normal things that don't have any gases that they give off, the certification process is pretty short. As astronauts, we usually have a representative on these teams, like for example the safety review board, but we're more being a liaison, and the other people on the ground are actually the experts, and they do the work for that. Are people or robots used to fix, leak, make repairs? To my knowledge, most of the repairs have been done by people. We don't get leaks very often, but people fix those leaks. We do have a robotic arm on the outside of the space station that could be used to do some things like that, but in general, people are making the repairs. Sometimes we will use the robots to do something that's very slow, but they can do some tasks for repair, but it probably takes 10 or 100 times longer for the robot to do it than for a human to do it. Is flex tape or flex glue used to fix leaks or repairs? So I think, I'm not an expert on that. I've never performed that, but I think both of those are candidates for leaks and repairs depending on how big the leak is or how big the repair is. There are also other products that are available as well, but I really don't know. I would probably have to look it up on the internet just like you, but I don't know what the latest and greatest materials are. We are very creative though up there in space, and when we fix things, for example, an interesting mission to look at is STS-120. That flight, we didn't have, one of our solar arrays didn't unfurl, and so we had to be creative and use the materials that we had on the space station to make those repairs. Now we have a 3D printer, so we would be able to 3D print some things that could be used that weren't planned on to make a repair. Are there any questions about those 5 answers before I go on to the next 5, Joby?
So Marie.
This is Marie. Yeah, we have so many questions coming in so quickly that I think we'll just have you keep going through the list, and then we'll see how much time
and then we'll start answering. Okay. All right. This is all fun stuff, and I really enjoy talking to you kids. What's our age range out there?
This would be an age range of 9 to 14.
Awesome.
So
yeah, I'm
elementary school and middle school.
Yeah, I'm a father of 3 kids. My kids are all grown up now. My daughter's the youngest. She's a senior in college. She's probably going to go to medical school, and my 2 boys are, one's married and the other's left the state, and they're both engineers. So, but I love the age of 9 to 14. I've been through it 3 times with my kids, and then I've got a nephew and nephews and nieces too. So, all right. What would be best for sticking to the ship in space? Velcro, magnets, or suction cups? And the answer is yes. They're all very good. We use Velcro. It's interesting. It doesn't take much Velcro, because even like a huge 400 millimeter lens that's like 1.5 feet long, a little tiny piece of Velcro is all that's needed to attach it to a wall, because of course gravity's not pulling on it. Actually, I have a funny story to tell. The Russians had a big camera wall with all their lenses and cameras with little tiny pieces of Velcro. And as I was new and unsteady in microgravity, I remember visiting the Russians, and my trajectory was a little bit off, and I actually bowled over the whole camera wall, and all the lenses and cameras went flying everywhere. So we don't use, it doesn't take much Velcro, but we use it all the time. Magnets are particularly helpful for things like knives and forks, for example. We've got a magnet. We had a magnet on the space shuttle eating tray, which we could put our knife or fork down and it wouldn't float away. And a magnet is really good for something that is an irregular shape that Velcro really wouldn't work for. You can also tether items, which you didn't mention, by putting a little string on it and tying it to it, and then tying it to yourself, and then it won't get away. Suction cups, we didn't use those so much, but those are effective as well. The trouble with suction cups is sometimes it's hard to get them unstuck. So a suction cup with a little tab on it would be more helpful, but we did use suction cups. There are a couple other things that you don't have listed. We would use springs. We had a spring on our food tray where you could put a thing like a tortilla. A tortilla, it's not magnetic, can't put Velcro on it, and so the spring would hold that. We also have bungee cords, a lot of bungee cords to hold things down in space. How do astronauts stay still when working on the ISS, and does it hurt their feet? So I'll answer the last one first. It certainly doesn't hurt your feet. In fact, it's very, very comfortable. Our feet over time get super sensitive because we're not walking on them like we do on Earth. So we're studying that. They actually were studying my feet on both of my missions because they get really hypersensitive, and they just change a little bit because they're not used to it. Our bodies are used to living on the Earth and walking on our feet. When you don't do that, even for 16 days, the feet change. Now, as far as, but they come right back in a couple days, and there's a later question about that, I think. So how do you stay still? Well, if we're doing something like robotics, we have these foot loops that we can put anywhere, and in particular, the foot loops in front of the workstation for the robotic arms, they're actually attached to the floor. So you stick your feet in there, and it really holds you stable. We also have foot loops positioned around in key areas where we're going to be doing work or organizing things or whatever, and oftentimes you can move those foot loops around. We can also attach ourselves to just about any structure to secure ourselves. I used to squeeze my legs together and hang upside down like a bat on the space shuttle, on our the boom that we would, it was the escape boom, a big long thing that was on the ceiling. I would just squeeze my knees together. It doesn't take much pressure to attach yourself somewhere because there's no gravity pulling on you. And I usually ate my meals upside down. That was kind of a funny thing that I did for my crew members as we enjoyed meals together. So you could pretty much hang out anywhere, put your foot under something or squeeze your legs together, and you'll stay put. We also had hand holds, so you could use a hand and hold yourself down as well. Okay. When NASA sends supplies to the ISS, how much of it is for the astronauts' social help? Are there games, robotic pets? Okay. So there are games up there. I played a game of chess. Actually, Greg Chamatoff and I played chess against the world on STS-134. There's a YouTube video out about that. It's kind of corny, but it was fun. We had magnetic chess pieces, and then we played the world over time. Played really slowly because we had to do it on our off time. And I know there are other games up there. I tried to take cards with me, and they don't work very well. My wife got me the magnetic cards that actually stick to a board, but it wasn't really very practical, and nobody really knew how to play the card games I wanted to play anyway. And I didn't have that much time to play games. When you're up there for a long period of time, like 6 months or a year, then there's more time to play games. Robotic pets, I don't know of any. That's an interesting idea, but I don't know of any. That would be kind of cool though. So social health, we don't put that much. Our supplies are very low percentage for social help, but there is some, especially crew members that are up there for 3, 6 months or a year. They get things from their families. They might get a movie, or they might get other things that remind them of their kids or their spouse or their family. But a majority of the supplies that go up to the ISS are to do, our experiments, to support our experiments, and then, food and things that we use that we need for our day-to-day life. Can you hear or see family at home through magnetic wavelengths via Skype or sound travel? So the answer is yes, we do get to see our families at home. We have a special voice over IP that goes through the communication satellites and then down to the ground. And so we do have the capability of calling on the phone. I remember I called my daughter, she was 10 years old, at a slumber party during my first flight, and she was passing the cell phone around to her friends. It was really a lot of fun. I call people all the time on my off time. We also had video teleconferences through this same system. And although we didn't get a lot of those, they did schedule them for me twice on each of my flights. And that was probably one of the most wonderful times that I had with my family, was one of those video teleconferences when we had the cupola. And that the cupola is something to learn about. It's a bay window that looks at our planet from the bottom of the space station. It's a beautiful, beautiful module. And as an aside, having windows are really important. My sister's an architect. She told me that. She said the cupola is important, and I didn't realize how important it was until I saw it, because it wasn't up there on my first flight. But anyway, talking to my family, I remember looking up the cupola, and it was a 20-minute video teleconference, and we started in Michigan, and then during the course of the video teleconference, and of course I had a wireless laptop, just like here. Like I can show you this room that I'm in right now. My brother's behind me on that photograph, but I could share what it looked like in space with my family, and so I'd turn the laptop around, and they could see Ireland, they could see Europe as we were floating by, the Mediterranean Sea, and we ended up at Madagascar. So for that 20-minute flight or 20-minute pass, talking to my family about their dance, about their band. Carrie was talking about her, the dog and her kindergarten class because she's a teacher. It was just a wonderful experience with my family on that video teleconference. So they do it all the time. How do you celebrate holidays in space? Well, we do it very much like we do on the ground. At Christmas time, we get, hats and, Christmas hats, and we do get some presents. We don't probably get as many as you get down on the ground. We generally do not have a Christmas tree, but they'll do something that kind of looks like a Christmas tree. Certainly won't be a real Christmas tree. And Halloween, people dress up, and so we really try to celebrate all the holidays, the major holidays, when we're in space, because we've been on the space station your entire lives. I mean, the oldest in this group is about 14 years old, and I call you the space generation because literally your entire lives we've been living and working with somebody on the International Space Station. So every holiday for the last almost 18 years, we've had people up on the space station. Okay.
Thank
Astronaut.
You.
Okay.
No, I just
ahead.
wanted to say, Greg, before we moved on to the next section, the first LEGO League challenge this year into orbit is identifying a physical or social problem faced by humans during long duration space exploration. And so a lot of these questions that the students are generating are based on that challenge this year. And so you'll notice a lot of trends in their questions regarding astronaut health and social atmosphere and things like that. So I just kind of wanted to remind the group again that all of these questions that you have submitted to Astronaut Johnson to answer are all related to your challenge this year.
Yes, yes. And I'm very aware of the challenge, and I have gotten a lot of questions over the last several weeks. I actually have a buddy of mine I used to fly fighters with, and he actually asked me to come up and hang out in Kansas City for an evening, have a nice meal, and talk to his kids in person. Obviously, I can't do that with everybody, but I'm happy to help in any way I can. And so, these calls are, it's an honor for me to talk to you all, and hopefully you'll learn something, and maybe I might have an impact on something that affects you all somewhere down the road, like people affected me when I was growing up. So, okay, let me talk about, let me start off with physical. So what kind of physical problems do you have in space? That's question number 4. And physical problems come in, basically 2 kinds. One is there's a system in your body that gets disrupted by being in microgravity. That could be something like your digestive system, for example. The food we have up in space is very sterile, and it's pretty good, but it's different than what we have here on the ground. And so all the way your stomach is all set up kind of changes over time. Now, we're very adaptable, and our bodies figure it out, but some people they feel nauseated because of their stomach and their inner ear. The semicircular canals that we have here on the ground, there's fluids in our semicircular canals that help us understand up from down, even with our eyes closed. Well, in space, you don't have that. Those little cilia, those little sensors that are in your semicircular canals, they all go crazy. And so people get nauseated because of that, and also because of their stomach. But we're pretty adaptable, and we get used to it over time. So people can get dizzy, and they can even get so nauseated that they vomit. So we have emesis bags up there. As the pilot, I was in charge of all the emesis bags. We never used any on any of my flights, but other flights they've used 50 of them. You know how that goes. One person gets sick, and then everybody else starts getting sick, and it's also kind of messy in zero gravity. So that sort of problem, our bodily systems is something that we just have to adapt to. Over time, it gets better and better. Another issue that we have is structural. We grow taller in space. I grew 4.2 centimeters taller in space, not quite to 6 feet tall. My wife wanted to marry somebody who was 6 feet tall. I'm 5'9". I became almost 5'11", never made it to 6 feet tall. But that's funny, but the extension of your spine can cause problems with your ligaments. I actually had difficulty with my neck on my second flight. And actually I got relief by kind of pressing down on my head, which is, different. It affects different astronauts different ways. Some have really a lot of difficulty with their lower back. So we have a kind of a device that helps us kind of pull on those muscles on the lower back so that it can give us some relief. The fluids shift in our bodies. So what that does is that makes our heads look like a little bit more like a tomato. So if you look at an astronaut in space, they look a little puffy, and that's because the fluids have shifted up toward your head because gravity's not pulling down on the fluids when we're upright here, like it is here on the ground. Also, that fluid can affect anything up here. There was a theory that fluid caused our eye vision to shift. We know that vision shifts, but we really don't know the reason. One of the hypotheses is that we get higher intracranial pressure from the fluid shift. That may or may not be true. I've read different studies on that. But in any case, our eyesight does change, and usually it gets a little bit worse. And then when we come back to Earth, it doesn't necessarily go back to the way it was. So that's, my height, I came right back to my height that I was, but our eye shift for some astronauts doesn't quite fully correct itself. My eyes actually got better in space, so I didn't even have to use the contacts or eyeglasses that I brought up with me. I don't have too much of a shift in my eyesight. Without glasses, I'm pretty good, pretty close to good. But when I was up in space, my eyes actually got better. It's kind of funny. And also in space, our bones and our muscles degrade because gravity just naturally gives us exercise as we walk around on the planet. And so in space, our brain realizes, wow, we don't need as much bone structure or muscle structure. And so our bones actually degrade about 1.5% to 2% of the bone mass per month unless we do countermeasures to prevent that from happening. So the long duration astronauts do a lot of exercise to counter the effect of this bone atrophy. That's probably too big of a word to use for 9 to 14, but bone degradation. They degrade in space over time. So there are a lot of physical effects, and a lot of them we don't really even know. That's why we're studying them. There's increased radiation, for example, up in space, and we don't know the long-term effect of increased radiation on the astronauts. And so that's something that we're watching closely, because when we go to Mars, that's going to be a lot longer flight and a higher radiation dosage, and we don't want to affect the physical wellness of our astronauts. Okay, now I'll jump up to 1. What did you miss most? Now we're talking about our mental health. Okay, so of course you miss your family. Now with the information age, we do, I spoke to somebody in my family every day I was up in space, and I think most astronauts speak to somebody in their family every day, but it's not like being with them. And so I did miss my family. I missed my dog. I missed the normal things that we get used to in space because it is isolated. How do we cope with family separation? Well, as I said, we do communicate by email and by phone to share with our families. My first flight, it's interesting when I think 10 years ago versus 7 years ago, my first and second flight. My first flight, we could only send emails. We did an email sync twice a day. My second flight, we could email maybe 10 or 15 times a day. And now you can email pretty much continuously up in space. And I think they also have, fairly straightforward internet. We didn't have that 10 years ago. So the digital world is changing at an exponential rate. And so increasingly that separation is mitigated by more and more time, better technology in order to communicate with our families. Did you have any negative feelings like depression in space? I didn't. My flights were 16 days long. I loved every minute of my space flights. I did detect that a few of the longer duration astronauts had some negative feelings because they'd been up there for months. But to me, it was like I would have stayed up there and they could go in my spot back on the shuttle. Of course, we can't do that, but I would have stayed up there for 3 more months. It's just such a magical place to be in space. It's what I trained for so many years. So I never got depressed or had negative feelings. I did miss my family, but it was such an adventure. And it was so special that I just didn't have those feelings. Now, I know some people probably have. So again, it's just like anything else. People are different, and some are, more prone to feeling depressed than others, I guess. And then number 5, what are your thoughts on using yoga or meditation to help you in space? I think that's a great idea. 10 years ago, one of my crewmates said, "Oh, you should do yoga." And I wasn't a yogi at the time. I just didn't get it. But now I've done yoga with my daughter a little bit, and I better understand the sort of spiritualness and kind of meditation and relaxation and breathing that yoga brings you. And that's a great idea. And I think that could be extremely helpful, especially for astronauts that go up there for years at a time. So I think that's a very good idea, and you're really onto something. Next one. Recovery once returning to Earth. Very insightful. Yes, as I said before, we're very adaptable human beings. In fact, all living organisms are very adaptable to the changes in space, and it's very, very interesting to study that. For example, spiders, we've tested spiders when they get to space, and spiders obviously make beautiful webs here on the Earth, but they're used to the force of gravity to help them do that. And so when we took spiders up to space, their webs were very disorganized, but over time they figured it out. I mean, it's amazing how living things adjust to their environments, and animals and plants and humans do that on the Earth. So the same phenomenon occurs in space, and it was obvious even in my 16-day mission, the periods of times that it took to get used to being in space. So now we get back on the ground. I would say, okay, my first flight, I came back. I'd been on the ground for about 3 hours, and I saw my daughter for the first time. And I was hugging her, and I had her. She was 10 years old. I had her here, and I had my first Diet Coke. Hadn't had a Diet Coke in 16 days, and I had that here. And I was enjoying a Diet Coke, and the Diet Coke bubbles don't work in space. There's no convection. There's no buoyancy. So we don't get soda pop in space. That's one of the things I missed. And so I'm drinking this Diet Coke, and the NASA administrator, a guy named Mike Griffin, came up to shake my hand. Now, normally, what one would do, if somebody comes to shake your hand, I'm right-handed, I would move my Diet Coke into my left hand and then shake the person's hand. But because I'd been in space, my brain was acclimated to be in microgravity, and in space, if you could just release something and it would stay there, and you could do whatever, so we had multiple tools often, and we just release them and then do this and then use the screwdriver here or whatever. So I released the Diet Coke thinking it'd stay there because my daughter was in my left arm, and then I shook the man's hand. Well, of course, my Diet Coke splashed onto his shoes, and then my 10-year-old daughter said to me, "Daddy, why did you drop your Diet Coke all over the NASA administrator's shoes?" And I said, "Sweetie, I thought it'd stay there because I really did expect it to stay there." So even in 16 days, my brain was calibrated to microgravity, and it takes about 2 days or so to actually readjust. And so all the sorts of things that we would do, we would hold things very lightly in space, like a cracker. You don't have to put much pressure on a cracker to eat it in space. And even over 16 days, my calibration, hand-eye coordination, you would have this much pressure to have a cracker. Well, I would drop crackers all the time when I got down. I would drop anything because it takes a lot more force to hold things than it does in zero gravity. So how long does it take for your body to readjust once back on Earth? So I was talking about hand-eye coordination. As I said, my height was the same within 4 hours. I was back to 5'9". Vision, my vision almost instantly changed back. It was tested right after I landed, and my vision went right back to the way it was. But as I said, other people, sometimes their vision never goes all the way back. There have been cases where their eye vision shifted 3 diopters. You can look that up. That's a big vision shift, and they only got like a diopter and a half back. So some eyes on some astronauts never recover. If you're up for a long period of time, like 6 months, the bones can degrade and muscles can degrade to the point that you can't walk. So some astronauts can't walk after a long duration flight, and they go to physical therapy, and it might take a week or 2 before they get back. Other astronauts, like Bill Shepard on Expedition 1, he was up there for 4 months, and I was the guy that pulled him out of the ship way back, and it was like he'd been out on a weekend camp out. He walked right off the shuttle, and he was fine. So it depends, between people how much time their bodies take to readjust. They wouldn't let me drive a car for 2 days. I thought that was a little overkill, but that's what they told us, that our hand-eye body coordination, or hand-eye coordination, was degraded and maybe a little bit insidious, and we wouldn't detect that we were going to be dangerous. Next question: do astronauts come back from space exploration with a change in personality? I would say that in general we do. There's a couple things that are fairly universal among the astronauts. One is, they call it the overview effect, and that's once you get off the planet and you look at the planet from being off of the planet, you think about the planet differently. Some astronauts become more spiritual or become more religious. Some astronauts, like me, have an awareness of how special our planet is when you're off it and you're looking at it go by. And our whole planet is so beautiful. The space station is it's on a tilt. Its orbit is tilted 51 degrees from the Earth's axis. So as we orbit the Earth every 90 minutes and the Earth is rotating underneath us, we see everything from 51 north, which is like above Michigan, it's in Canada, to 51 south, that was well down to the southern part of South America, and all the way around the planet. So we flew over Australia, South Africa. I mean, we saw all of the planet pretty much, except for the poles and the extreme latitudes. And so we just live on a beautiful planet. You look at the Earth, there's no borders in the Middle East. You wonder why people are fighting. It's almost like you see a spaceship. The Earth is like a spaceship, and then the people are like, are they going to be passengers or are they going to be crew members? It's like, we want everybody to be crew members and take care of their ship. So to me, recycling, the fragile atmosphere we had, made me think about air pollution. It changed me in wanting to contribute more to Spaceship Earth and be a better crew member to all the inhabitants of the planet. And I think most astronauts kind of have that sense that they want everybody to be crew members. And I want you all to be crew members and take care of each other and take care of your planet. Now I think I've babbled on and on, but I think we have about 10 more minutes to talk about some other things. So this is a beautiful photograph of the space station that you see on the screen. The space station is about the size of a football field, weighs about 1 million pounds. and it's been delicately put together by 16 different nations over about 12 years. It's probably the greatest engineering feat of our civilization at this point, and a wonderful model of international cooperation. Some pieces of the space station were made in different countries, and they only were attached for the first time when they were joined together in space. Just an amazing facility of the space station. So, all right, with that, I'll take some more questions. So, Joby or Marie?
Thank you so much, Greg. That was wonderful. And I'm sure Marie has collected several questions from crew members who want to learn more about your experience in the space. So, Marie, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I just want to say to everyone listening in, I apologize. There is no way we're going to get to the literally hundreds of questions that are pouring in. So I think you've really sparked a lot of great thinking. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to pick some of the...
Okay, so I'll tell you, I will, if you want, you can take those questions, and if you can, cull them down and turn them into about 20 themes or whatever, I'd be happy to answer them by email. So,
okay.
And what I can do is I can talk into my phone, and maybe it won't be perfect grammar, but I'll try to have good diction, and Siri will help me out, and I'd be happy to take on another 20 or 30 questions if you can kind of cull through them and send them to me. I'm happy to do that. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay, I will do that. So we had quite a few questions asking about the exercise part in space, wanting to know what kinds of exercises are you doing? Do astronauts get bored while they're doing the exercises? Are you able to watch videos while you're exercising, thinking on Earth, the treadmills, and a lot of questions about exercise.
Okay, so on the space shuttle, we just had a bicycle, and I pedaled almost every day to get aerobic exercise. Pilots, we needed our vestibular systems, aerobic exercise was more important to pilots so that we would be really physically ready for the G's that we were going to encounter and controlling the ship when we started feeling gravity. For longer duration space flight, it's the anaerobic exercise is also important. So we didn't focus on that on the shorter flights because our bones won't degrade that fast. One time I pedaled all the way around the Earth, 92 minutes, and I wasn't bored. I had an iPod that my son had put all my favorite music on. We could read books. People do watch movies when they're cycling. So I just can't. I was never bored. The long duration astronauts, they can exercise 90 minutes to 2 hours every single day. And so maybe they might get bored, but I think you could still put up a video or I think they even watch, they have CDs of news and other things. So I don't think they generally get bored, but it is a substantial part of our experience in space is pedaling. And then on the space station, there's a treadmill. We didn't have that on the space shuttle. And then of course we had the ARED, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device, which is essentially a weightlifting machine made for microgravity that they have. When I was up there, it was really close to the cupola, and all the astronauts worked out on the ARED.
We have quite a few questions asking about keeping the space station clean, and how do you do laundry, and where do you put the trash, and can a vacuum work in space? Okay,
so vacuums work in space, and we had one on the space shuttle, and they have one on the space station. They're very handy, like a little dustbuster vacuum, great thing to have. As far as washing clothes, to my knowledge, we don't wash clothes. On the space shuttle, we were spoiled. We got a fresh shirt every day. We'd wear it, and then we put it in the dry trash and bring it home with us. On the space station, they don't have the luxury of having fresh clothes every day. I think it's like once a week, and then again they wear them, and then they either return them to Earth or put them in the waste that gets burned up on reentry. But I think shirts are special. Like this shirt is my crew shirt for STS-134. I wouldn't want that to burn up on reentry. I want to keep it so that I could wear it when I'm talking to kids in North Carolina, for example. But does that, to my knowledge, they don't wash clothes. They just wear them for a long period of time. How do you keep it clean? Well, it's a pretty clean environment anyway, and of course we're not going to track in dirt from outside because that's you don't get that. I did talk to the moonwalkers about cleanliness, and there was a lot of dust on the moon, and they couldn't get themselves entirely clean when they came back into the lunar module. So there was quite a bit of dust floating around, and John Young told me that it really was a little bit obnoxious. So there was grit everywhere. It was kind of like a West Texas dust storm after they got back into the lunar module. But at the space station, it's pretty clean.
Okay. We had what I thought was a really interesting question is, what was the most dangerous experience you've had in space?
Okay, I didn't get to do a spacewalk, and had I done a spacewalk, that's probably the most dangerous thing you could do. I mean, honestly, you know, the general danger that I had was the danger that everybody has when they fly in space is, you know, the launch experience is a little bit dangerous. We lost one space shuttle during the launch of the 135, and then re-entry is a little bit dangerous, and we lost one shuttle as well in the 135 missions we've had. So we lost one shuttle going up and one shuttle coming back, and so those are probably the most dangerous phases of flight. They're probably a little bit more dangerous than driving in Houston. I drove in Houston today about 150 miles this morning. I don't know how that weighs compared to the launch and the reentry, but that I'd say those are the most dangerous. Now, living and working in space, there is always a danger that you'll get hit by something, but we do have ways of tracking debris. And if debris is big enough and we have enough advance notice, we can actually move the space station out of the way. It's called a debris avoidance maneuver, and that happens, you know, every few months or so. It'll happen where a piece of debris, they know it's going to be too close to the space station for comfort, and so they'll move the space station.
And then I think this would be a great question to close out our time with you. And it's a two-part question. What inspired you to be an astronaut, and what was the best part about being an astronaut?
Okay, so I actually do know the moment that I was first inspired to be an astronaut. The date was July 20th, 1969. I was 7 years old. I was sitting with my sister and brother, my mom and dad, and at my grandparents' house. And they woke us up, it was past our bedtime, to watch Neil Armstrong step on the moon. And at that moment, I knew that I dreamed of being an astronaut. I didn't think it was likely, but I truly, in my heart, told my brother and sister, and of course they laughed at me, that I really wanted to try to be an astronaut. I was really interested in science. I loved airplanes. I trained to be an engineer, and it was always in the back of my mind. And so when I had these different touch points along the way, including the one that I described with Charlie Bolden in 1992, where I met with him and he said, "Hey, go to test pilot school and do really well, and you actually could be an astronaut." That's actually the first time I thought it was even possible. But that clearly was when I was first inspired, was when I was 7 years old. I remember it like it was yesterday. What was the second part? Was what was the most fun about being an astronaut, or rewarding? What was the question?
The best part. What's the best part about being an astronaut?
So that's hard to answer. Just like, you know, which one of your kids is your favorite kid? You know, you love the entire. I love all my kids differently, and I love being an astronaut. But probably the best part of being an astronaut was my very first launch, because I had been training for almost 10 years. And as I told you, I thought about it since I was 7 years old. And so actually getting that first launch experience. It was crazy. It was in the middle of the night. It illuminated the Florida coast. Vibration, sound, acceleration, and we had a wall of clouds that were illuminated by the solid rocket boosters. And as we went through that cloud deck, it was like flying through a wall of fire. It was just such an amazing experience that words just don't even do it justice. And so getting to fly in space was probably the greatest moment of being an astronaut. But I will tell you that being in microgravity, floating around for 16 days twice in my life, was, a close second, because everything in microgravity is different. I mean, working is fun, eating is fun, sleeping is fun. It was just such a different place, a magical place, that I hope each of you get the opportunity to experience someday in your lifetime. So
thank you so very much. We will definitely take you up on your offer. I've let everybody know that we won't be sharing your personal email with all of them. We will compile the questions, send that to you, and take you up on your offer to answer them in bulk as much as possible. But thank you so much for your time, and you've inspired me. I want to go to space. So am I too old to go to space?
You are definitely not too old, Marie. I mean, if you think about airplanes, 100 years ago, nobody flew in airplanes. And now everybody, most people have the opportunity to fly at some points in their lives. And some people fly, like me, 100,000 miles a year. Airplanes are becoming more and more like cars were normal in the 50s and 60s, right? And so spaceships are going to be the same. It might take longer for us to get there, but I think more and more people are going to fly in space, and it's important that you kids out there discover new things and learn and stand on the shoulders of the engineers and the scientists before you to figure out how to get there better, faster, cheaper. We're going to have a campus of space stations out there in 50 years, and I think the opportunity to fly in space is going to greatly increase over the next 100 years. And we might live longer too. So I think there's a great opportunity to fly in space. I'd like to tell the kids across North Carolina, congratulations for being part of this LEGO program. Congratulations for being curious and asking these great questions. It's your Saturday. You could be out playing with your friends, you're doing something, or going to a movie, but you're dedicating part of your your learning experience on the weekend, and that is a very good thing. So I'm glad you're part of this program. I hope you're successful in winning. I know there's a lot of kids around the country. I've spoken to so many already, but thank you for being a part of it, and thank you, Joby and Marie and all the adults, because it's your dedication and focus that's allowed this whole thing to happen. So hats off to you.
Thank you, Greg, so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Greg. And teams, if you could please remember to take a selfie and send it on to us, and we will share your pictures with him as well. Thank you all so much for your time. This was incredibly inspiring, and best wishes to you, Mr. Johnson, and best wishes to all the team.
All right. Well, thank you very much. You all take care now.
Bye-bye.